Hello, everyone, and welcome to First Fridays, a webinar series about the business of being a spiritual writer. These informal conversations take place on the first Friday of every month. Today, our guest is our good friend, Kate Rademacher. In her debut memoir, Following the Red Bird, First Steps into a Life of Faith, Kate describes how she came to embrace a relationship with God after maintaining a pick and choose approach to spirituality for many years. Raised in a staunchly secular community, Christianity was never a path she had seriously considered. Married to a devout Buddhist, Kate was sitting on a cushion at her husband's meditation center one day when Jesus appeared unexpectedly in her consciousness and called her to follow him. She was baptized a year later to the day. A graduate of Wesleyan University in Connecticut and the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill's Gilling School of Global Public Health, Kate's professional work is focused on international public health. Kate's second book, Their Faces Shown, A Foster Parent's Lessons of Loving and Letting Go, will be released in the summer of 2020. And she's currently working on a third book, Reclaiming Rest, The Promise of Sabbath, Solitude, and Stillness in a Nonstop World, which will be published in 2021. So Kate was planning to be one of our speakers at the Writing for Life conference in Charlotte that would have taken place a couple of weeks ago. But at least we're really glad to spend some time with her virtually. So welcome, Kate.
Thank you, Brian. Great to be here.
So there's just a whole series of different questions that I thought we could talk about today, all dealing with, some aspect, some business aspect of being a spiritual writer. And you and I have had several conversations on many of these different topics. So it's really good to revisit them here, for a bigger audience.
Great.
So maybe you can tell us, just to start off with, a couple of the new projects that you're working on that I mentioned briefly. Can you just talk about those a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. So as you mentioned, my first memoir was published in 2017, Following the Red Bird, which is, as you described, a memoir about my quirky and unexpected faith journey. It was published by an independent press called Light Messages. And I'm working with Light Messages again on my second book, which will be published this August. It's called Their Faces Shown, as you mentioned, and it really, it is a memoir about our experience as foster parents, and it's also really a broader spiritual exploration of some bigger themes around marriage and who is and isn't in our family, and how do we love our neighbors, especially when our neighbors are often challenging and complicated and all that. So, and then as you mentioned, I'm working now with Broadleaf, which is, I'm not sure if spin-off is the right word, but it's affiliated with Fortress Press under their broader imprint on a book on reclaiming rest. And I'm smiling because the as you read, the subtitle has the words "nonstop world" in it, and of course the world is semi-stopped at this point. So I'm in discussions with my editor there about how to, if and how to pivot some of the content, knowing that the book won't come out until 2021, and the global landscape is changing rapidly day by day. So book publishing is not a just in time. This is not a magazine article that will be published next week, but so we want to, of course, make our books relevant, but also realize that we're in a very complicated and challenging global environment right now. So I'm sure other writers are dealing with that as well.
Yeah, no, that's kind of a difficult set of choices around, some of that branding, messaging, descriptions.
Right.
So I also mentioned in the introduction that you've got a day job, a full-time day job that keeps you quite busy, and as a result, but also you're really committed to writing. I mean, clearly, and so as a result, that offers a lot of challenges. And I know you've written a blog article about being a bivocational writer. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to. I mean, it's really it's really a favorite topic because it's been really a big issue I've grappled with as a writer, as a Christian writer, and then as a very serious public health professional that, I put a lot of my heart and soul and sweat equity and time into my career. And so when Brian, you and I were at Wild Goose last summer, and it was really powerful to me because I described my experience as you mentioned, what I call being bivocational, so having two vocations. And several people came up afterwards to me after the discussion, and so that really resonated. I'm an attorney who's trying to write my first novel. I'm a researcher who's thinking about publishing a faith-based memoir as well, and I'm concerned with how that might affect my reputation, which is exactly the challenge that I've worried about and wondered about. So I think as we know, it's difficult to make money often, not for everyone, but often for writing. So I think many of us, whether it's practical or because we have other work we love, are pursuing writing in addition to other work. So how do we balance that? And for me, it really became a lot of people ask me about how do I juggle my time. So I'm happy to talk about that. But for me, the bigger issue was when it came to platform building, which is, I know, a lot of what we're talking about today is the sort of business of being a spiritual writer. And, I have a need and an obligation to have a robust platform as a public health professional. I'm active on Twitter, I'm active on LinkedIn. I need to demonstrate to my funders, to my colleagues, to partner organizations that I'm, on the cutting edge of my field, that I'm a thought leader, and at the same time, I, would potentially be contributing a voice in a different way, albeit, but in a similar sort of process around spiritual writing. And because I work in international public health, where, our mantra is evidence-based, I was really fearful that publishing a neurotic, as I call it, self-revealing, quirky spiritual memoir might be surprising, certainly to colleagues, and potentially even erode my professional legitimacy. So that's something I worried a lot about prior to the publication of the book, but I really felt called to do it, and I pressed on. And, I think, like many of the things we worry about, it was, a lot of my worries were put to rest when I published the book. My colleagues have been incredibly supportive. And then the other thing is, which I would recommend to other people, other writers who are bivocational or having more than one platforms, is I got really great advice from Rochelle Gardner, who is a literary agent and does consulting. And she said, it's okay to have more than one platform. We all have different identities. Some of us are parents and workers, some of us, we don't mix all parts of ourselves all the time. And so I took that advice to heart, and the way that practically played out was I have a very active, I use Twitter for my day job, and I'm really active on Twitter and LinkedIn for my professional work, and then I use Facebook and Instagram more for my spiritual writing. So that's a very practical, operational way, but I think it really helped me sort of to get the mindset straight at the beginning that it was okay to have two platforms and to keep them somewhat separate.
Well, I think one thing that I'm sure helped when you were introducing your first book and, getting reactions from your coworkers and such, you're very thoughtful and intelligent, in your faith writing, just as much as I'm sure you are in your health work. So, I think that that helps, right? I mean, people are impressed by your thinking, whether it's, on this or that.
Yeah. And again, this may be my own, we've talked a lot about, and Brian, you've really helped me. I have a blog on my website about, which really tries to how I'm sort of early in my faith journey. And, the issue is that as a Christian writer, if I was writing books about the art of motorcycle maintenance or cooking or whatever, there would be no problem. But I think, unfortunately, given our political and cultural landscape, people wrongly often think, but I mean, if you just go based on what's on the newspaper, I mean, it's not wrong. I mean, again, who is the face of opposition to contraceptive access in the United States and globally? It's often, the religious community, which is really sad and unfortunate. So I think that in my case, these concerns were not just, that's where it was coming from, and so I think part of that is we also need to, as perhaps, because I know you work on compassionate Christianity as well, as progressive Christians, really need to make our voices heard, that we, for example, just as an example of a topic I work on, strongly support access to high quality contraceptives. So anyway, that's kind of an aside with my other vocation, but that's how it interrelated.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, there are Christians with, one view on this and Christians with a different view on this. And so, we both need to be heard. So a moment ago, you mentioned a little bit about how you juggle the bivocational world from a time management perspective. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. And again, I'm here. I'm just pulling on the wisdom of others. So I'll just share what I've gleaned from others. And particularly, I've been part of a community called Hope Writers, and they talk about accessing both the cracks of time and the caverns of time in your life. And so that's really how I've done it. And I did that. I did that before I ever heard that term, but when I heard it, I was like, that's how I did it. So my first book, I never intended to write it. It was just like a friend of mine said, it was like a baby that was coming, it needed to be birthed. It needed to come out of me. And so because of that, it just had an energy of its own, a life of its own. And it was really, writing it was truly one of the most spiritual experiences for me, because I felt that I felt this kind of call that was bigger than myself to write the book, that was separate from my own preconceived agenda. And because of that, I just wrote it in the cracks of time, and that often meant, literally, I would drop my daughter off at elementary school. I would have to be at work at 9 o'clock. I would have 35-minute commute, and I would stop my car and write for 15 minutes. I remember one time I got out of the park and I gave myself an extra 15 minutes. I sat there for 25 minutes. I would write on receipts in my purse. And I have an incredibly supportive partner. My husband is great. He does, we have a very equitable marriage, so he does more of perhaps the chores than I do, although I know this is being recorded, but so, I have a wonderful partner who's really supportive. So that was kind of the cracks of time, grabbing little bits of time. But then I would say I really would make intentional time to give myself dedicated time. And so several times I got, and when we talked to Barbara Brown Taylor, I remember so vividly this summer, she said, that's a great idea. So I'll share it with others. I would get cheap motels. You can go to Priceline or, so even if just 10 minutes from my house, I got a cheap motel 2 or 3 times and just spent a night there and, spent, solid 6-7 hours just really focusing. So I would encourage other writers to take advantage of both. I think a lot of people just wait till they have the chunks of time and they don't take advantage of the cracks of time because it feels so hectic and disorganized. But that's how our lives are. Our lives are hectic and moving fast. And so we take advantage of those cracks of time. And then also really making dedicated time for a longer chunk when you can get away, be focused, etc.
Good. I think that's very helpful. So another thing we touched on briefly, I want to dive into a little bit more, is this tension between building a following and self-promotion. Another thing that you and I have discussed a few times. So you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and it's interesting. I was thinking about this last night as I was reflecting for this talk. I think, like anything, I've grown in this area. I think when I first published my first book, a lot of what the book itself, what the substance is about, was my exposure to Christian teaching and thought as a new convert. And so one of the pieces of Christian theology and teaching and practice that just rocked my world was, Jesus's teaching that we are here not to be served, but to serve. And that is so antithetical to the teaching, that I've had, the subtle teaching that the world has taught me, which is that, yes, okay, we're here to make the world a better place and help, but also, or in addition, we're really here to advance ourselves, to, build ourselves up, to get credit, to build our reputations, to advance ourselves, to climb the ladder, so to speak. And so I really I was writing about being a new Christian and how that, as a new disciple of Christ, I was just really being transformed by a whole new way of a whole new teaching. And so I was writing about that and writing about the application of that. And so then when it came to marketing the book, I didn't want to revert to the same old, worldly ways of trying to climb the ladder of success. And so it felt very schizophrenic and confusing. And for wise people like you, Brian, who would say, well, but you're serving your audience, you're not promoting yourself. I just felt this uncomfortable edge. And I think because it was a memoir, it's not explicit. It's not explicit, like how does it help people? And so anyway, it just, it was confusing. But I think, I really have come to believe and to understand that our stories do help people. It's even if you're not writing a self-help book or, an instructional manual like that. Again, Rochelle really helped me to say their books can serve different purposes, and they can entertain us, they can educate us, but they can also inspire us, or she had another word, which I'm forgetting now, which is basically like, lift each other up. And so even if just hearing about other people's experiences, even if it's not the same as our own, can be supportive. And so I think that helped me change my mindset around this really isn't about self-promotion. It's about sharing our stories so that we can support and inspire one another, just as I have been. I was reading a memoir last night and I found it very encouraging. That was the word, encouraging. So that's one thing. And then, and then I think, like anything, learning anything new, it's confusing, I think, to know how to market a book, but it's interesting. It's challenging. How do you use social media? How do you connect with influencers? How do you think about developing a reader persona for your book? And so as I'm thinking about my second and third books, I'm embracing that with a new sense of fun. And frankly, part of that is I've learned in the past few years that, like anything, like with my professional work, part of the fun of it is networking and meeting people. And so, Brian, I think of the relationship I have with you is a perfect example. I loved going to Writing to Your Life. It was such a turning point for me. It filled me up. It fed me. I met great people. I felt, even though it's cheesy, I felt like I found my tribe at Writing for Your Life. I'm not just saying that. And so those relationships are fun. And so it no longer becomes about achieving some external, sales goal. It becomes about being authentic in the world and connecting with people in authentic ways, whether that's a reader, whether that's another writer, whether that's, you, Brian, as a convener. So that's just all great. So I'm growing. You'll be happy to know, Brian.
I'm so glad to, kind of hear the evolution in your, thinking on this topic, because I'm very supportive of that, as you know. And the only other thing I would add to what you said is that, if we really do believe that God is working through us to do this stuff, then, who are we to stand in the way of making that happen? It's not about us. It's about how we can help people, how God can work through us. So, that's at least the way I, try to think of it myself. It's not about me. It's about how I can help people. So
yeah, and I think it's tricky because a childhood friend of mine, an adult, this was a very painful moment, but I gave a book talk in my community that I grew up in, which again is a pretty secular community, as you described in the blurb. And I gave my book talk. I talked about this conversion journey, and she said, "But what's your goal? Like, what are you trying to do?" And I felt like what she was worried I was saying was, I'm trying to convert people, like this ugly stereotype she had about that I was out, that I'd become a proselytizer in the negative sense. And so again, I think that for me, there's been this difficult edge, which is, what is my goal? And I think the goal is, like the way God works in us, is not always clear to us. The ways that one person is going to receive my book is different than the way a second person and a third person is going to receive my book. So I can't control that. And I think that's another thing that is important. You and I were talking about this the other day. To me, the analogy is like launching a child. I have an adult stepson who went to college, who's been a child to me. I've known him since he was 4, and we took him to college. We set him up in the dorm. We loved him and supported him, and now he's launched. I don't control who he is in the world and how he's loved and received. And, so I think launching a book, although there's some danger in comparing a book to a child, I think that for me, marketing is, you go the distance with your child. You help your child succeed and get out into the world. Likewise, you help your book get out and be who it was meant to be, what it was meant to be, and so that's how I've also gotten my head around it.
I think that's a great analogy. Thank you for that. So what about working with editors? I think you've worked with a couple of different publishing houses, so far. And so I'm sure that experience is different from editor to editor. You want to chat about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky. I love the two editors I've worked with. They're just both so amazing and supportive. And so I don't have, I don't have any negative experiences to compare it to, but I'm just really, it's such a fun collaboration to be able to have somebody who's invested in you and your work and, like me, and I'm sure like many of your listeners, combines that sort of, interested in, where should the comma go, parsing the wordsmithing, copy editing, and then also sort of what is the overarching vision for the book, what's the big picture messages, the takeaway, how do we position them in the market, and to have really a partner in that is so rewarding. So I've worked with Light Messages, which I mentioned is an independent press, and now Broadleaf, which is a bigger Christian press. And so again, just really fortunate to have had those two experiences.
Good. So earlier you talked about how you kind of like have a couple of social media channels that are part of your professional healthcare platform, and a couple of others that are part of your writing platform. So can we talk a little bit more detail about that, and in particular how you're using those different platforms?
Yeah, and I'm sure I am not the best. I am not the best with my personal Christian writing, so this is still a growth edge for me. One thing I'm trying to do, which has really been fun for me, and it's been a challenge for me. So again, I'm leaning into that. Is I'm writing a book about Sabbath, as I mentioned, the Reclaiming Rest book, and so I'm posting on Instagram every night, Saturday evening as I begin my own Sabbath. I'm posting a Sabbath reflection, and it's really I'm not, don't have a ton of followers. It's not, rocking the world or anything, but it's been a way for me to, then perhaps that will grow over time, just really to be out there in the world with something I'm really working on in real time, that's helping, I think, communicate with potential readers and with my community, that a reminder that I'm working on this, and also, it helps me in real time think about it. I posted on Instagram last week I've been writing so much about rest, and I posted something about work on Instagram, which is, thinking about all the workers around the world who have been impacted by COVID, whether it's, healthcare workers who are at the front lines, or people who have been laid off, or teachers who are trying to teach virtually, or my own husband who's a psychologist trying to change to telehealth. I post on Instagram about the nature of work and the theology of work, and that just really it was great for me. It fed me, and it was nice to read people's responses. So that's just an example. But I think, again, I learn from my professional work and vice versa. And you and I have talked about this, Brian, but I think the best way to approach social media, at least for me, is not to be cutesy, not to do things to be, to be formulaic, because that will, I think, just come across as fake. And I think the best way to think about it is, what do I have to say in the world? What interests me? So, on Twitter, I'm tweeting things about my professional work that I'm passionate about, that interests me, that I find are cutting edge. I'm sharing information. I'm retweeting other people's work. I'm sharing my own thoughts. And that's all very authentic. So I think for our spiritual writing, we just need to be the same. I think it's dangerous to start to try to, at least for me, it's felt dangerous to try to fit a formula, because then I feel all yucky inside, but if I'm being authentic, then, there's no yuckiness. So
That's wonderful. I think that's a super perspective. I'm glad to see you doing that. All right. Like the things you said you were posting to Instagram, are you also posting that to Facebook or your blog?
Yeah, I continue to struggle with Facebook, and I think we can talk more about this, which is, as we've discussed, if you're posting to your personal Facebook feed, I think we're all familiar with that. If I'm posting to my author Facebook feed, oftentimes the way the algorithm works is people don't necessarily see that content unless I'm paying to promote it. So again, I need to get another counsel session with you offline, Brian, but I think I still struggle with the best ways to use Facebook that are cost effective. And again, but in the meantime, I'm posting on Facebook more for my personal feed. I posted about writing for your life and being disappointed that we were not meeting in person, and people, were supportive about that. So I think the challenge though is for all writers, and I'm still very much in the early phases of this, so I'm still in the learning phases. How do we not just kind of reach out to the people that are already in our networks? How do we not just reach out to our friends and our family, but yet how do we increase discoverability, as you would say, Brian? And how do we broaden that? And so, there's lots of great strategies like having a lead magnet, and I have a great website with a way to sign up for an email, for people to get my e-newsletters. But I know that the next thing on my to-do list is to have some sort of lead magnet so I could push that content out. I would say, actually, I'll give a shout out before we conclude, because I know we're kind of nearing the end of time, but I'm doing a blog series on my website called Risky Love, which ties into the theme of my second book. So I have been pushing out that content on Facebook. I'm collaborating with a group of women writers to explore the theme of risky love. And my own foster care book, part of my experience was when I decided to become a foster parent, or when my family did, there were big risks involved with that, right? Not only logistical, financial, very concrete, tangible risks, but the risk of loving and losing, right? We fell in love with the girl who was with us. She left. We had our hearts broken. It was risky and it was painful, but it was worth it for our family. So anyway, I decided to partner with a group of women writers to write about risky love. And it's been really fun so far. And co-authors or contributing authors have written about dating after divorce, working with HIV, with people living with HIV, being married to a spouse who has a serious health condition. So that's also been a way to connect with some of my favorite people, my favorite writers, to broaden our network, to amplify each other's message. And so, I think, again, COVID has sort of thrown that for a loop. How do we, does everything now sort of have to be about coronavirus all the time, or do we just press on with content we had originally planned? And I know that a lot of people are struggling with that question in real time. So that might be a whole nother webinar we could talk about, as writing in the era of COVID. But anyway, just some fun examples, hopefully.
I'm so glad that you're doing that collaborative project. I think that is such a good thing on multiple levels. And so I applaud you for doing that. And, I'm just very glad to see it. And I know some of the other people that you're involved with that, so I'm very glad about that as well.
Yeah, great folks. I'm really lucky.
So just to finish up, what kind of general advice would you give to folks that are earlier stage than you are, just getting started, maybe getting ready to launch their first book, or even just getting ready to write their first book?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, again, the writing for me has been such a gift in terms of the way the Holy Spirit has been moving in me. It's not something that I intended, that I planned for. And it just feels like there's so much, the wind of the Holy Spirit just feels like and so I think it was easy then to say, okay, now what am I supposed to do about that? How am I supposed to turn it into a product, and to get really stressed out about it? But I think the more you can just stay in the gift of, wherever the gift is for you, whether it's in the writing, whether it's in the networking and the relationship building, if it's in both. I did a writing workshop the other day online, and they said, write what your goal is for yourself. And I wrote down what my goal is. And then the next question the person asked was, now think about what you already have. And I realized that what I want is a lot of what I already have. I'm writing. I get to be bivocational. That's what I wrote. I said, I want to be able to write, and I want to be able to have my career. And it's like, I'm already there. And so I think I would maybe ask that to others too. It's like, what do you want? And then what do you, how much of that are you already doing that you can celebrate? If you're writing and you want to be writing, amen. So I don't know, that's just a couple of thoughts. And I think it's always easy to focus on what we don't have and where we aren't, where we haven't gotten the book deal, or we haven't, we haven't sold our first 1,000 copies or whatever. But I think it's really important to dwell with where we are and what the blessings and the gifts are in that. So hopefully that's relevant to some.
That's awesome. Great advice, Kate. And you've accomplished a ton, from the time I just first met you, which is not that long ago. So congratulations.
Well, and I have to say, for anybody Dana Trent is a buddy of mine. I know she's talked with you. I mean, publishing your first book is so scary. So scary. It's like you're putting your heart and soul out there. And she said that it's like it gets easier. So that's what I feel like. It feels more fun. I feel maybe, again, the analogy of like you're so scared when you're a new parent, and then you're like, I can do this. So if anybody's at that precipice of like their first book, they're trying to find a publisher, or it's going out in the world, and if you're totally scared and totally like, your feelings make sense, as my therapist husband would say. But yeah, so it's a fun ride. And again, I would say writing is no different from any other industry, which is what makes it fun is getting to know people and networking. And networking, I guess, is sort of sounds like a dirty word too, but it's like relationship building. So for anyone who's online now, or is viewing this later, I would be happy to connect by email or by phone, and you can find me online. I'll give you my website. It's katerademacher.com, very easy. You can check out the Risky Love blog series. I'm still welcoming contributors to that blog series, so you can reach out to me via my website if you're interested in contributing.
Awesome. Fantastic, Kate. Well, thank you so much. It's always so fun to spend time with you, and I'm really glad, we have these virtual connections that we can leverage now, even though our in-person connections are, on hold.
Yeah. Well, again, I just want to say that both the Writing for Your Life and Compassionate Christianity communities have been really a great gift for me. So look forward to connecting to more writers and readers and other industry folks through that forum. And thanks, Brian, for keeping us connected during these challenging times. It's really, really important to stay connected. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Kate. And thanks, everyone, for joining us today.
Have a great day. Stay safe and healthy, everybody.